Well, it's good to be back. In case you were not here last week, neither was I, so you're okay. I was away on vacation. It was a great time. We didn't go anywhere, but it got me to thinking about this sermon title, How Long? So if you've ever been in a car with children and you're on a long trip, you probably heard that question. Are we there yet? How much longer? Can we stop? How much longer? Are we there yet? How long? How long? How long? I was thinking about this. Even in today's technology, in today's world, everyone has their own video game or their own console, iPad, Kindle, whatever it is, and they still ask that question, don't they? How long? How much further? It just seems like forever to get somewhere. But as we get there, we arrive, and I was thinking about this. I used to travel to my grandparents who lived about an hour and a half away from my home, and I would ask that question, how long? But then as I started thinking about it more as an adult, I'm thinking, why would I ask that question? And it got me to start thinking about, well, maybe the question wasn't because it was a long trip. It could have been. But more because I felt I was forsaken. I was forgotten about. I was left in the back seat, and my brothers and sisters and I were, that other game they like to play. He touched me. She's on my side. Make it stop. Those things go along with us. But think about that for a minute. What does forsaken feel like? Just turn to someone nearby and just give them a little bit of description about what forsaken feels like. Oh, you're being awfully quiet for this moment. So it either tells me, one, you haven't been in a car with a child in a long time, or you don't remember your childhood very well, or you're a single child, whichever is the case. But we have that sense. What does forsaken feel like? Just give me some answers. Alone. Left out. Lost. How about this picture? Kind of forgotten. No one took care of it. No one is there anymore. Or maybe this picture that grabbed my heart. Trying a heart in a bucket. Sometimes it feels like that. Sometimes it feels like we've been forgotten about. And it isn't something that's just something that occurs just to us. Psalm 13 gives us these words, and they're in your worship folder. They're on the screen behind me, and if you would read them with me, I'd be eternally grateful for that. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord, my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. How long, O Lord? How long? In this psalm, we got two extremes, and on one side we have this prayer of deliverance, that they want the struggle to end. On the other side is the struggle, and we see the psalmist. He wants to be on the deliverance side, but he's stuck on the struggle side. And we hear that, we understand that, because we see that X being closer to the struggle side, and we can understand that that's where the psalmist is because we felt that. But oftentimes, it feels a little bit further. That X feels way, way on that other side. Maybe it's not maybe these words haven't grabbed your heart. Maybe these words will grab your heart. Just listen to these words as we hear from the message. Long enough, God. You've ignored me long enough. I've looked at the back of your head and your head long enough. Long enough I've carried this ton of trouble, lived with this stomach full of pain. Long enough my arrogant enemies have looked down their noses at me. Take a good look at me, God, my God. I want to look life in the eye. So no enemy can get the best of me. or laugh when I fall on my face. I've thrown myself headlong into your arms. I'm celebrating your rescue. I'm singing at the top of my lungs. I'm so full of answered prayers. We've been on this journey for some time. And we all understand what that side of struggle looks like. We understand it because we've been there. We've understand it because our stories have been very similar to the psalmist. And we think that maybe we're the only ones that travel down that road. We think we're the only ones that are on that side, that are the only ones that are struggling with this moment. But there's something resonating also within us. Something else that says that we're not alone. As the psalmist said, it's been long enough, Lord. As the NIV, the New International Version, told us, how long? And as we look in Scripture, we can see others who have echoed down this, who've been down this road with us, who echo that same heart that we have, because we've been struggling in our hearts. And we may have feel like we're alone on this journey, that we've been forsaken. And it's not just that we've been forsaken, but it's been a long time. It's been a long, long time. I mean, some of the other people, I think of Abraham and Moses. You want to talk about a long time? For 40 years, he was on top of the world. And then for another 40 years, he was in a desert. Alone. Wandering around. Bringing sheep, because he was a shepherd for his father-in-law. Walking them around, making sure they had what they needed. For 40 years. Well, think about that. He's 80 now. And he hears God once again. He hears once again. He sees this bush that's on fire, that's not really on fire, and he hears this gets this impression. Maybe hears this voice. He says, "This is holy ground. Take off your sandals, for I have a job for you to do." And just like us, I mean, if we saw a bush kind of on fire and thinking, "Man, that's really strange," and we heard those voices, we're like, "Well, who are you?" And the voice says, "I am God. I am who I am." And all of a sudden, Moses is like, "Okay, you are who you are, but I really don't want to go where you are. I've been in this place of solitude and quietness, and there's nothing else that I want," because he's grown accustomed to being alone. Grown accustomed to being forsaken. Grown accustomed to thinking no one cares. But God says, "I care. I'm here. And I will walk with you." We have David, and David as another person in the Bible who has this encounter with God. And then as he is facing this struggle, think about this struggle for a minute. Think about this struggle that you are, again, the favored person, and then the person that favors you turns against you. Talk about backstabbing. This is probably where that word backstabbing comes about, because as David's having dinner, he has a spear chucked at him. Misses him. But he knew he was no longer in that favored spot. And he was roaming again for years. For years. Jeremiah and Daniel, Peter and Paul, and even Jesus himself. Pastor Brad shared a great message last week on every miracle begins with a mess, and the scripture text was that Psalm 22, where Jesus is on the cross. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Excuse me. And Jesus understands. He's always been in connection with the Father. He's always had that communication. He's always been together. And all of a sudden, it's no longer there. As he takes on the weight, the weight of our wrongs, the weight of our sin. And just for that short moment, he's also asking, how long? I've never felt this before. I never had this before. I never understood this. What is going on? How long? For Jesus, it was a short time. I had C.S. Lewis on there because this is another person. If you've read the books, The Chronicles of Narnia, you see different people in different stages, but Aslan, who represents Jesus, who represents God, as Aslan comes in and out of the story, it's never on the other person's timetable. It's never on the character's timetable. Aslan just shows up. And the one, there's I'm going to forget which one it is, but there's 7 books, so read them all. But there's this one scene where the people have forgotten. And the animals, they're talking animals, but there's this time where the animals are no longer talking because they don't remember, because they felt forsaken, abandoned, lost. And then Aslan shows up. Right at the right moment, right at the right time. And that's what we're seeing in this story, in this Psalm 13. And we wonder how the psalmist got there. Because we know how we got there. We know how the characters, the scripture characters have gotten there, how C.S. Lewis has gotten there, how others have gotten there. Some of it's been through a crisis. Some of it's been through messy living. Sometimes it just happens on its own. It's just like we've been living our normal life, and all of a sudden there's quietness from heaven. It's like nothing occurred. And we feel that God has left us to our own devices. We feel that our prayer life has dried up. We feel that our soul has missing something. We feel that that we've just been left on an island, wondering, how long, O Lord? In Hebrew, in the Hebrew thought process, the mind, the body, and the soul are all wrapped up together. And the psalmist in verse 3 says, Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. So the scholars believe that the psalmist is struggling with death, struggling with this thought that his mind, his body, and his emotions are all going to go away because he's about to die. And we think about that deliverance and that struggle. He's thinking that he wants to be delivered from death. He wants to be out of that struggle of life and death. He wants to keep on living. And this whole idea of the mind, the body, and the emotion being together, all wrapped up into one being, into one thing, gives that idea that brings into to me, takes us back to Jesus on the cross. That as he's about to face death, and you get with the disciples, and they see that Jesus, the Son of God, and their thought that the mind, the body, and the emotion all wrapped up in together, that if the body dies, then everything else dies as well. That Jesus won't be there anymore. And everything he taught would go away. And everything that he had shared would go away. And so they're struggling as they're in the upper room, as they're in that place where Jesus is no longer with them. Jesus has abandoned them, and they're also in there crying, how long, oh God? We had this rich life with you. We spoke to you every day. We saw your power. We saw your miracles. We saw forgiveness. And it's now gone. How long? How long will it be? In our days, in our prayer time, in our conversation with God, in our relationship with God. Maybe you're here already. Maybe you're in that spot asking, how long, oh God? Maybe you're in that spot where it just seems like you've been forgotten about. Maybe you're in that spot that it seems like every time you say a prayer, it just bounces off. Maybe you're in that spot where you've been to church a couple different times and there's just no connection. Maybe you're in that spot where you have met some people that follow Jesus and you think, wow, there's just nothing here. It's quiet. And it's been some time. What do we do? What do we do? Because in that forsakenness, we feel that there's dogged hope. But we also have that mounting despair. We're hoping that things will change, but at the same time, as it gets quiet, we don't feel that anymore. Which leads us into this time of prayer, which leads us back into God's presence, which leads us back into this moment of God, where are you? I feel that you've left me, and I wonder, how long will this last? But the psalmist does something different. The psalmist sees this and he begins to ask that question, well, what should I do? What do I need to do? And it begins with this idea of trust. It begins with this moment that we trust, because our trust precedes our faith. We know in our mind the character of God, that God is the same yesterday as He is today, as He will be tomorrow. We understand that, we believe that, we live that we trust in that character of God. But in that same moment, as we think about that trust then, that trust begins to change our heart and our attitude. Because if God is the same as yesterday as He is today, yesterday I knew God was with me. Yesterday I understood that God's presence was there. Yesterday as I looked and I saw, I knew God was walking with me. Just as He walked with Abraham and Moses and David, Daniel and Jeremiah, C.S. Lewis, the psalmist, we begin to see that just as He's walked with other people of faith, just as He's always walked in this world, we can see the stories, we can hear the miracles, we can see where God has been moving. And we trust. We trust that God will move again. Because that trust will lead to worship. That trust will lead to prayer. As the psalmist put it at the end, he says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in my salvation. And I will sing of your praises." I will sing of what's going on. See, the psalmist knew his foe was death. He knew that it was coming, and that body, mind, and soul was going to be disappearing. But he also knew that he couldn't focus on that. He also knew that God was the same, is the same. He also knew that God was going to work. So it changed his heart, it changed his attitude. It was no longer just, God, where are you? It's, God, I'm going to sing of your praise. My heart rejoices, and I am going to sing. I'm going to sing of you. Maybe you're in this spot with the psalmist. Maybe you've been asking, how long? Maybe it's been quiet. Maybe it's been too quiet for too long. What will you do? Will you trust in the character of God? Will you trust that Jesus died and rose again? Will you trust that God is still working and moving today? Will you worship? Will you worship the God who rose from the dead? Will you continue to seek his face and seek him forever? In your worship folder is a card, a little prayer card in there. One side says prayer partner, but I'm going to look at the other side. It says examine. And as we look at this word examine and we look at this prayer, I know I talked about this a couple weeks ago, but this brings a different look to that prayer of examine. It's just taking that time at the end of the day, beginning of the day, and just focusing on what God is doing. Focusing on what God has done. What are two good things God has done? What are two things we could have done better? What's some of the confession that we have? And I encourage you to take that card and to use that card. To make it a part of your daily practice. Trusting that God is listening, trusting that God is hearing. And as you have those prayers, as you have that moment of reflection, you'll begin to see God in different places. And that worship will be a part of that day. Just as that prayer is a part of that day. Just as that moment of heaven opening up.